Let's all hope I hit the right button. Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody showing up today. We're really close to the end in this journey that we've started. I'll go through the basic slides like we always have, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussions. Okay, so here we are with the agenda for the day. We'll do the introductions again. Actually, we're probably going to skip the introductions. I don't see any new people on this. Actually, I am going to do staff introductions, and then we'll do guidelines, overview, and scope again. We'll look at the draft changes to the administrative rules since the last set, and then we'll revisit the schedule and wrap up. Finish line is in sight now. You guys have done a fantastic job hanging in there. We are almost ready to wrap this thing up, and I do appreciate everybody's time. We will be filing something on the 30th, which is with the Secretary of State's office, and then from there it follows that whole process, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to that point. These slides are a little out of order. Let's do introductions. So I want to introduce staff. Some of you guys have met almost everybody here, but we have Donnie Featherman, who's the manager for building codes and standards. Christina Wilkes is lurking someplace in the background. She's the FB and FB&R program coordinator. And so she's been kind of watching this. And then our newest staff member, Amelia Spinner, is also on this. And she is our administrative coordinator for building codes and standards. So she's going to be working with the three program coordinators that we have, and with Donnie and myself, to make sure that we take care of all you guys and everything that is factory built coming into the state or built in the state of Colorado. Looking at the guidelines, overview, and scope, we have a big job to get done and a tough schedule. But like I said, we're almost there at the end. Priority time will be given to the TAC members. The guests are welcome to comment by raising their hand in the meeting. For new members of the public, we don't have any, but in case they're watching it on video at a future date, we reference the controlling statute of Colorado Revised Statute 2432, 3301 through 3329. The tiny home bill is passed, which is HB 221242. The administrative rules, which is what we're modifying here and these TAC meetings, is 8 Colorado Code Regulation 1302-14, and the previous TAC meeting recordings, which are all on the DOH website. We're only addressing tiny homes as defined by statute, not RV models, park models, tiny homes without wheels, etc. We're only addressing Colorado law and Colorado rules. We're only addressing foundations for those local jurisdictions that do not have a building department. And we'll follow the guidance language to the greatest extent possible provided in the bill regarding different codes about tiny homes, the small production concerns, the size of the factories, the costs, the affordability intent, but this note is carried throughout. Most of these slides is the plan review fees, inspection fees, and registration expenses are necessary because the legislature did not appropriate those expenses into our program. Regarding different codes and standards, we've had that discussion. We know that there is another initiative for a new rules standards around tiny homes. We can point to, when those get done, we can point to Administrative Rule 215, which allows alternatives to be considered. And then to keep us moving, let's try to provide comments in the form which can be easily adopted into the administrative rules. And Tracy, you dropped off to panelist. I'm going to promote you back to panelist again. As you know, guys, I am even though I have staff that has offered to help. We're so close to the end, I'm going to just carry it through to the end. I am taking notes. I'm running the slide deck. I am watching the participants and the chat, and trying to do all those things. So if I change gears real quick and do something, that's the reason that I'm doing it. Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I will often just respond verbally to a comment in the chat, because for me to stop and type into the chat. Yeah, P.T. Barnum is my role model. I want to be just like him when I grow up, if I grow up. So we are, with the last revision I sent out, we're close. And we're going to talk about the changes that we've made since the last meeting on the 14th of March. We're going to talk a little bit about some final cleanup. And I think that's all that we have to do. And that includes highlights and numbering, and then reference checking back to the statute. And then if you're opposed to a change, please provide information why, health and safety, if it's a manufacturing difficulty, if it's duplicative, the wrong code, etc. If you're in general agreement to a change but think the wording needs changed, please provide me that new recommended wording. And you may make edits to the Word doc, send emails, etc. But again, I think we're getting close to the end of this thing. With that said, is that my goal at the end of the meeting, this is to find out if anybody is very opposed to anything that's in the administrative rules, because once we file, we're pretty much done. We do have another TAC meeting scheduled for the 4th of April, where we will talk about Rule 7 and any other things that we need to. Even though we're going to file these rules on the 30th or 31st, we can amend those, but within the 10 days of filing. So that's my drop dead, absolutely have to be done deadline. And the reason my goal is to make sure that we're all in general agreement is I'm hoping that we have been fair to all the different stakeholder groups. And I hope that we have made the rules better than they were before. And I hope that we've integrated HB 221242 to the best extent that we can, because from here, then it goes out to a much larger group for review, and it goes to the State Housing Board. I'm actually briefing State Housing Board on why we're doing this on the 11th of April. And then I believe the 19th of May is the actual hearing date. And it will be a public hearing on the administrative rules. And we'll talk about how that process works. Anybody can send in comments on the rules at that point in time. And me and my team will compile those things and make a presentation to the State Housing Board with recommendations for adoption of the rules. And what I'm hoping is that, and you guys can certainly attend that State Housing Board meeting. You can certainly make public comment, but I'm hoping that we have worked out any problems or challenges with the rules before we get to that point. If you guys want to come in and say what a great process it's been, and that we all have worked together, that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. But again, you are a member of the public, and you have the right and entitlement to speak your mind at that state hearing, public hearing at the State Housing Board. So as you know, our rules are set up in 7 different areas: definitions, codes and standards, fees. Rule 4 is factory built residential structures, modular and non-residential structures. It's the biggest section in the entire rules. Rule 5 takes up the cellars. Rule 6 is installation. And Rule 7 is enforcement. All right, here's where we are. This is the draft, the changes that we've made, and some just notes on cleanup. I've added one slide in there. I'll talk about that on 2.7.7. So the first bullet there is that we've cleaned up some typos, numbering, and we're starting to do some of that cross check of statute. It's not complete yet. That's why in that Word document I sent out, you'll see stuff that's still highlighted, comments off to the side on what's been checked and what's not been checked. Although I thought this was going to be one of the easiest things to change, the AC name has continued to be a struggle with groups inside and outside of the TAC. So we still need to finalize that. Once we finalize that today or tomorrow, we are going to go through the entire document and start making all those changes. The two things we're talking about is on-site manufacturers compliance or just OC on-site compliance. This replaces the AC, the alternative compliance, alternative construction acronym that we've used and have in every single document from top to bottom. I'll talk in just a minute about 2.77, which it deals with air barriers and mechanical ventilation. The other thing that we have done is, so let's just go in order. I'm going to go to the next slide and then we'll bounce back to that list. So in the information that in the slide deck that I sent out last Friday, we had deleted all of this section after discussions with Donnie. We went back and put back in the last paragraph on this, and this is because the first paragraph had a conflict with the IRC, and Rule 2.7 is the International Energy Conservation Code section. And so this is, but we wanted to make sure that we had ventilation, mechanical ventilation in there, someplace between 3 and 5 air exchanges per hour in zones 5 through 7. Does anybody have any questions on that? I see Eric has joined the attendee list. Eric, I'm going to allow you to talk. Any questions or concerns on this final revision?
I got a
Nate, go
question.
ahead.
So, and I got to be honest, I'm not incredibly familiar on what we currently have in place on the blower door test. I don't know if Mike's on or not, but
He's not,
I know that
but Mark is. So
in the past, we had a lot of conversations around blower door test. We had a lot of conversations around getting them completed in the rural parts of the state. I know that, or at least I think that we wrote it in such a way to provide flexibility for that in the past, meaning like we haven't been getting blower door tests for the last number of years. And so I just kind of like want to point out the fact that I believe putting this in is going to require a blower door test on every unit. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? And is that correct going forward?
So you remember correctly, we had this discussion. This information that I put in that second paragraph there, or actually the third that starts out, buildings/dwellings, has always been in the rules. So, and we did talk about the fact that it was very hard to get blower door test in the remote area. So I guess the question is, how have we been meeting this requirement for mechanical ventilation in the past? And so Jane actually had her hand up first, then I'm going to jump to Donnie, and then I'm going to jump to Mark, and I think we can wrap this up pretty quick. Janine?
I'll be truthful about it. We haven't been requiring it. We can't get anybody up here to do them.
Right.
So we have ignored that section, unfortunately.
That's my understanding as well.
The discussion of ignoring it is a little troubling to me, but we'll figure that out. Donnie, you want to provide some clarification? And then Mark, I'm glad you raised your hand because I was going to call on you too.
Yeah, so this part we did discuss. This has been in the rules for some time now. I think probably from the rule change in 2018-19 timeframe. But this exemption, it creates a conflict with other requirements in the IRC for whole house ventilation systems. So if you exempt the blower door test, right, you are required to have mechanical ventilation system regardless of our rules. It's just in the IRC that mechanical or the whole house ventilation systems would be required if you meet a certain threshold for air changes, right? But the problem is, how do you get those air changes without doing a blower door test, right? Another portion would be natural ventilation. Tiny homes might want to use this as an alternative for compliance. But in order to do natural ventilation, you still have to prove that the home doesn't do a certain amount of air changes per hour, which again would require a blower door test, right? By taking this out, it would require all homes to go through the blower door test that is mandatory in both the IECC and also the IRC, right? But we would still be able to figure out if the home is required to have a mechanical ventilation system or not, right? But I do see Janine's point that there are locations that may have this problem with getting somebody out there to do these kind of tests. And so this is kind of just something I just thought of just now, is that maybe rewrite it that in areas that the local specifically exempt the blower door test, that would be, we would be able to do exempt the requirement for the blower door test, because at least it would be consistent with any home that's being done in that jurisdiction anyway. If they are exempting the blower door test for that jurisdiction, then all the homes that are in that jurisdiction are being exempt from that blower door test, not just modular.
Yeah, Donnie, the only problem of pushing that back into local control is that we're going to get inconsistent application for the factories, I think.
Well, if the local specifically exempt it, I'm pretty sure Janine and Park County probably put it in their rules that they exempt it, but I'm just assuming.
Yeah, Janine, could you maybe answer that question? Did you actually write that into policy, or do you just ignore it?
No, it's actually a policy. In our last amendments to the code, when we adopted the 2012s, it was an amendment to the code saying it's not required here. Is there any chance that those could be done at the factory versus on site? Because they're one whole unit. It's not like a modular where we have marriage lines and have to have them put together where they could still have air leakage. So would it be reasonable to have these done at the factory versus having them done on site? Just a thought.
The part about doing it at the factory is a lot of those things aren't buttoned up until they get on site.
Yeah. So Janine, we're talking about all products, including townhome, or not tiny townhomes, tiny homes.
Tiny homes,
Which say tiny homes might be able to do
which
it.
is why Tracy has her hand held up really high. But I want to go to Mark first.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Donnie, this is referencing the ERI in there, and under, now this is just for the commercial side of this, because it says buildings / dwellings, that basically underneath C402, 0.5, 0.1, 0.2, and the other ones that go with that, if the assemblies have been tested and show that they do have the materials together make an air barrier, are we going to say that basically, because it says example blower door, are we going to say that if they have a listed assembly and it's put in the way it's supposed to, that at this point it should work the way that the tested material was assembled for that, like for a wall assembly or something?
Well, this section specifically calls out R402, which is the residential section.
Correct. And the ERI is strictly a residential index. It's not for commercial buildings.
Yeah, so this is just for residential products.
Okay, so basically in that case, if I go to section, if I go to the residential section of that, if I do an ERI and it is looked at by, I hate to use this word, but a qualified person to verify that the ERI has been corrected and they score the points that they need at that point, are we going to use that as an exception to the blower door requirement? Because Sam, you're right, we cannot do multi-wides in the plant unless they set the entire house up like it was going to be set up on site.
Yeah, so my understanding is that second paragraph there, it lessened the requirement for the blower air changes requirement, or air changes.
Correct.
So I believe it was 5 per hour on the top and then 3 per hour on the bottom. And then we changed to 3 hour on the top and then 5 hour on the bottom, which actually gave a little more room there for them to have a little more air changes.
Right, because the earlier energy codes gave us a little bit of lateral. As these energy codes changed 2018, 21 gets even worse as far as air tightness, because you can make a house too tight.
Yeah, and so, the first paragraph that we have there is basically saying that if you do meet all the requirements for the air barrier and you provide that checklist through the entire process, you would be exempt, right? But the problem is if we run into where we're trying to figure out whether or not the home needs a whole house ventilation system and you exempt it and you provide one anyway, are you going to be pulling too much air from outside when you're exhausting that air from indoors, right?
Correct.
You're creating that vacuum. Now you're pulling in cold air from outside just to ventilate that space. Or let's say you don't provide it or don't provide a whole house ventilation system. Now you're pumping that space full of air, and now you got air escaping through those openings through the other direction, right? So it creates a little bit of a conflict, and that's why we need to figure out what we need to do or what we want to do with this, because we don't want to create a bigger problem by keeping this in there and then trying to figure out what we're going to do with the whole house ventilation system. Or like I said, if some of these tiny homes or even other products, we did get some multifamilies that wanted to use the natural ventilation method for the apartment buildings, right? So it creates a little bit of a conflict. It makes it a difficult process to try to do a plan review and a submittal because you're not sure if you need to provide the whole house ventilation, or if you need to, if it's not required to have it or not. So I think originally we took out the whole thing, but if we can keep part of it to at least give that little bit of more of a buffer there for the applicant, for the air changes per hour, it would help out with the testing.
Right.
But it would also give us the ability to figure out whether or not it needs a whole house ventilation system or not.
Well, I know manufacturers probably aren't going to like this, but on the plans, if we show the actual assembly, the way that it is constructed from front to rear, or outside to inside, and we do an ERI on it, because basically at that point, the rated design complies with, the verbiage that's in the code. Would that be acceptable for jurisdictions like Janine's that basically the logistics to get an air blower door test done, would that allow them to still qualify for some of the compliance grants or tax breaks and stuff like that, because the ERI would show that their house scored at this level?
That's the thing, even with the ERI, it still requires a three air changes per hour.
Right. That's the only problem, that I don't have an out for you, Sam.
Yeah, it still requires a blower door test. So that's the thing. And even if we, was it 2025 when we started talking about integrating the 2021 code?
Right.
It's more strict, right?
Yes.
And so, if we want to at least give us a little more time before we jump into the more stricter code, we need to come up with something now to buy us time until we have to adopt the 2021, right? But what is that method? What do we need to do to give us that time, right? Because the whole house ventilation system is it's required in the IRC or in the code books, right? It's just saying like, hey, if you have this amount of air changes per hour, you have to have the whole house mechanical system, right?
Right.
But natural ventilation, that's just like, hey, if they choose to do it, then they have to provide the blow door test, right? But mechanical ventilation is just like, hey, you either need it or you don't. You need to show us that whether or not you need it or you don't, right? So
Right,
that's
the
one
MEP would do the
component.
analysis for the design of that system, correct?
Yeah, so that's the only part that makes this a little difficult, right? If the whole house ventilation system was a choice, like, hey, we want to provide this, then you have to provide the blower test and make it a lot easier, right? But it doesn't. You either have two choices: you provide it or you don't. But you need to prove that you don't need it.
Right.
So
Because
let
one
me
thing
ask-
that we do want to clarify, Sam, is the COM check does not address this issue. If you do the COM check, it only addresses the thermal envelope compliance. It does
Right.
not address any of this other stuff. The ERI does because it's very, very detailed. It's based on the ResNet. So basically, Energy Star Home.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Not a lot of factories do blower tests, but there are factories that do blower tests. Even with the exemption, they still provide it because they're providing a higher energy rated structure.
Right.
So they still do them. So this wouldn't really apply to those factories because they do them anyway. It's really for the factories that, you know, submit their plans with the exemption. So, but yeah, it was something that we were discussing yesterday. So wanted to have that discussion with you guys and see if there's any kind of alternatives you can come up with or think of that would, I don't know, buy us a little more time before we get to the 2021, where we might not be able to get out of this anymore.
So Donnie and Tracy, I haven't forgot you. I'll jump to you in just a second. If we do a blower door test in the field and it fails, is this something that's easy to fix in the field, or is this a tough one?
Sometimes it's not overcomplicated, Sam. I mean, I've seen it to the point where we've just brought in a 3-inch air intake into the air handler of the unit, and that fixed it right away. Or we run a exhaust fan in the bathroom. We leave one on continuous. There's where we're talking about the whole house. Those are some of the quick fixes. Some of the other fixes were not so easy.
Okay. Well, I know that sounds easier than fixing air barrier problems in the field.
Correct.
So I would say because regardless if they provided, let's say we kept this paragraph or we took this paragraph out, per the IECC, and I'm pretty sure it's in the IRC as well, that checklist is already there of what they're required to do for the air barrier. So
Correct.
Yeah, let's say that they did everything to the T, right? And they provided all those air barrier requirements that they're supposed to. Chances are, if they have leakage, it's most likely going to be at the marriage wall line, where they may have not sealed it properly, because everything else is already being protected, right?
Or a window, right? Or a window.
Yeah, window. But yeah, if they provided everything that they're supposed to per that checklist, they shouldn't have any air leakage at those points on that checklist. The
Correct.
chances are, if there was air leakage, it would be around that air barrier, or maybe just an opening somewhere in the floor where they forgot to seal or something, right?
Donnie, let me jump to Tracy real quick, and then over to Janine, and then we'll come back real quick to you. Tracy, go ahead. You muted. There you go, Trace. Tracy, we can't hear you. Tracy, are you still there? All right, Tracy, you keep working on sound. Just jump in whenever you can, okay? Janine?
After being on code change at the national level for so long, I would recommend that we leave this language as is, regardless if it's a burden on, different jurisdictions like ours, because we can do a policy paper. We're phasing in this, and that would be accepted by the state. So, state energy office. So I recommend we leave the language as it is. It complies with IRC, it complies with the energy code. And I don't think we really want to get out of that compliance. This is a good phase in paragraph. And I think we should just leave it be as it's written in the black.
Janine, I'm having trouble. I can hear you, but I'm having a little trouble understanding you. So if somebody wants to, and it just it's me, right? Because I'm having some issues with my ears. But Donnie, you want to go next?
Yeah, no, so just to clarify, Janine, you said the area in black to keep the same?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then what about the area in red though? I think that's probably the bigger concern.
But that was the strike through being replaced with the paragraph in black, correct?
The paragraph in black is already there. There's two choices in 2.7.7. So you either comply with the exemption for the blower door test, which is paragraph 1, or you comply with the second section there for 2.7.7 that basically gives you a bigger buffer when it comes to the actual testing of the blower. So that's how that paragraph is broken up.
Okay.
So it's already there. But I think the concern with everybody is how are we going to provide a blower test, right? Because these smaller factories may not have a blower test machine or somebody who's qualified in the area to do that testing when they need that done, right?
Right.
So that's why I was asking, or throwing out there, for jurisdictions that do not require a blower test, maybe those ones would be okay to be exempt from the blower test because the locals already exempted for all their other houses that are being built at their site locations. So why not? Why provide something, at least when it comes to the blower test, for that jurisdiction if the jurisdiction doesn't require it for any other home in their jurisdiction?
Makes sense.
And
Now, one of the things, Sam and Donnie, basically, if they do the ERI, they have to have a QII inspection, the quality installation inspection. That's an actual formal inspection of that insulation. That would have to be documented on the inspection forms or part of the ERI checklist that's incorporated into that. So they would actually have to call in somebody to do that inspection.
Sorry, Mark, I interrupted you there. Could we take out the ERI part of it then? Just take out the ERI and just for the testing, keep the testing requirements the same?
Well, the ERI gives them an alternate path. I mean, if they do the ERI, technically they don't have to do the COM check because the ERI is more stringent than the COM check.
I'd like to find an alternate path on this if we can. And Robbie is here now. And Robbie, you've got your hand up.
Got his hand up.
Yep. So Robbie, what we're talking about is the problems with blower door tests, not the problems, but the
Logistics.
availability of blower door tests. People that are qualified to do that around the state, we may not be able to do that efficiently. All this on the slide right now, Robbie, was actually with no strike throughs was on there in the past set of rules. And then we started tweaking it yesterday. And then we got, I knew this was going to be a pretty big discussion item. So did you have questions or do you have recommendations on for us?
Yeah, a couple things. one, I'd recommend not eliminating the blower door test, is my personal opinion. Second, you cannot physically do the energy rating index path or the cost compliance path. So section R405 and R406 without doing a blower door test. It's an integral part of the energy model that gives you the ability to gives you the flexibility to trade off even further than the res check allows you to do that. So res check only allows you to basically do trade-offs using R values and U values. So you can put something more R value in one place, so you can put less R value in another place, for example. These other pathways start taking into account energy that is moving with air, convection, the convection part of energy loss and gain in that house. And you're able to trade off, then you're able to gain more flexibility in how you comply with the code, because you're able to trade off house tightness for less R value or U value in your building thermal envelope there. And then specifically the energy model, it's in essence, you can think of it as a mandatory component of the energy model there. So if you're going to take out blower door tests, you're going to lose the ability to use those compliance options there.
Can you hear me, Sam?
Tracy, we can hear you now.
I have no idea what's going on, but anywho, so obviously I have some concerns, right? Only because, you know, I'm going to try to circle this. I kind of took some notes through the process of listening to everybody. What do we have to, I guess my question to the team is this: as a small manufacturer, what is the team asking us to do basically? Because I've heard a lot of different, you know, options here, right? Or maybe not really options, but there's a lot of feedback going on around this area. I think that our tiny houses, when you use spray foam and you use the zip system and the zip tape and the way we flash the houses and things that we're doing, our houses are too tight. Okay, the houses are too tight. We've been told our tiny houses are too tight, right? And so you have to have some sort of ventilation. And I get that, we respect that. But I also heard people here say, you know, things that you do to fix that air intake and the air barrier and things like that are things like a bathroom ventilation fan. Well, in the tiny house build industry, when you're working with a good builder, we're not going and buying some cheap little tiny fan that you put on in a bathroom. We're actually going and buying the more expensive bathroom fan, because our houses are built so tight, and because of the materials that we use, we don't use drywall, right? We use wood because we need our houses to be lighter. We need them to be more flexible because they do move. Drywall cracks, it's too heavy. We don't use that, right? Most of us in tiny house world, you don't see that anyways. Okay, I would say 95% of the time you don't see drywall. Anyways, the point that I'm bringing up here is we're already running these heavy duty bathroom fans, and any educated tiny house person, right, knows that you're supposed to run those bathroom fans while you're taking showers, and even up to a half hour after you're taking your showers, to make sure that you're not getting condensation in your house. Our houses, they're too tight. Right, so we actually need that good ventilation, so that way we don't get condensation.
I'm sorry, I've got to break in there, because the building science tells us that houses can't be too tight. They can be under ventilated. Houses are not too tight. The requirement of building a house to 3 air changes is not too tight. Building a house to the passive house standard at 0.6 air changes is not too tight. The issue is all about ventilation. And the code already requires whole house controlled mechanical ventilation, as well as spot ventilation in your bathrooms, kitchens, or laundries.
Correct.
So the issue is not that the house is tight. The issue is it going to be ventilated properly? And you can use your bathroom, you can get double use of your bathroom exhaust fan if you're going to put it on an actual schedule there. So just turning it on for when you're taking your shower or whatnot is not the issue. The issue is whole house controlled mechanical ventilation. And that's the building science that's wrapped into the code already.
Right. So what I hear then is everybody's supposed to be doing these blower tests. I mean, because if that's what I hear you guys saying, right? That's what I heard Janine say, or other people that she already said it was policy. But then I heard other people say, well, we haven't really been abiding by that policy because of certain reasons. It's not just rural areas, you guys. I have a tiny house sitting here that I've called upon to have people come out and do a blower test, just so that way I could actually see this, right? I want to know. I want to know. Especially since it's a house that I've already done the res check on, right? I think that's good data for us as a team, good education for us. However, I also have to take a step back and say, not everybody builds the way Tiny Building Experts builds. Not everybody uses, does what we do. They're probably going to have to in order to meet all of these codes, you guys, right? They're going to have to make a lot of changes, and that's fine. I'm encouraging all the small builders to make those changes. You know what I mean? And to abide by it. But what are you guys asking for? Because it's not just rural areas. We're also competing against bigger companies. And this is one of those things that I don't really know that I expect you guys to understand, but as a tiny house builder, you can't get companies or places to come out to you. Okay. They don't want to mess with your mini splits. They don't want to do testing. They don't want to, we're not big enough for them, right? We're small compared to a general contractor that's going to have somebody come out and book them for months on end. So we're also competing from a small business for these blower test people. I've called around multiple places, and I'm in Colorado Springs, and I have a house sitting there ready to be tested. So
Tracy,
I think there's more to it, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a cost thing for the end user. It's not just a scheduling thing for a builder. It's not just that stuff. I think there's a lot of inconsistencies here. So my question is, what does everybody want? Like, how do we solve this pain? Because whole house ventilation, I respect that. And I get the penetrations at the dryer and the bathroom and the kitchen. We're doing that. That's all great. We think the houses are tight, right? That's why we had air exchangers, because we've seen condensation in the past when a house is built well. I hear what you guys are saying. What do we need to do to show some data or documentation besides, would a blower test work? And once I get a blower test done, do I have to do it on every single house? And do we just send that cost to the customer? What are we doing?
So Tracy, I hear what you're saying, and we did have this discussion in the past, is the unavailability of people to get to do blower door tests. And I certainly am not trying to penalize the industry, any segment of the industry. What we're trying to do at the end of the day is be code compliant in the most efficient way possible. And
so is that just the blower test then, Sam? I mean, is that what it comes down to? Is that was it? Because I just want to know what is the end result?
That's what I'm trying to find out too, Tracy. Donnie, I think you were next, and then I'm going to go to Robbie and Mike. And Janine, you've got your hand up again about, I don't know if that's a continuation or not. Robbie, who did I go to? Donnie?
I'll go. So, Tracy, I think you might have missed the part where, this in the prior code changes, this paragraph that exempted structures was put in to help, mitigate that problem, right?
Sure.
But the thing is it ended up creating a conflict in the code, right? And so that's what we're trying to fix. Like, how can we compromise and meet both code sections and still comply with the energy code? So one of the things you got to remember too is you're trying to build, a tiny home. This is what you want to build. You want to build a tiny home that is meeting a minimum requirement that allows this person to use that structure for a long-term use, right? If you don't want to do the blower test, or you don't want to do all this other stuff to build a tiny home, you still have the RV option that you don't have to do that, right? But in this, we're trying to build a product that allows them to use this structure for long-term use. And this is what's been proven so far, right? To show that if you build your structure this way, it meets that requirement and can be used for long-term use, right? So we can tweak it.
I respect that. I respect that, but it sounds like it's not happening because of all the pains behind it.
Well, it's really that it's it depends on what jurisdiction you go to, right? And Janine's jurisdiction, they might not require it. But if you go to Boulder, they're probably one of the bigger energy jurisdictions in Colorado. They require blower door tests on everything, right? So it just depends on where you go. Not all jurisdictions may enforce it, or maybe they just didn't take it out of their requirements. I worked in a jurisdiction that it was not exempted, but blower door tests weren't really being tested. But I guess the counter to that was that I would say a good 90 to 95% of the homes that were built in that jurisdiction, the home builders are already testing those structures because they're all Energy Star rated, right? So although we weren't doing the test ourselves or requiring a test at that time, a lot of the builders are already doing the Energy Star building or Energy Star rating system. And so they're already being required to do the blower door test to meet that Energy Star rating. So like I said, it just really depends on where you go, right? But that's why we're having this conversation now. Like, what can we do to maybe not require a blower door test, but what do we do to mitigate the other part that requires a blower door test so that you can be exempt from that ventilation requirement, right?
Well, that's why I'm offering and have been asking to try to get this, get a blower test to show you guys. But I also, again, take a step back and say, not everybody's building like this. So maybe it does have to be a requirement. And if it does have to be a requirement, then somebody needs to go into the blower door testing business.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm serious.
So
No, I'm serious too, Tracy. So yeah.
That's what I'd like to bring up is that the state, this is Robbie.
Thanks, Robbie. I was going to you next.
Working with the state of Colorado, this is primarily an issue in rural areas, and it is an issue. And the state recognizes that it's an issue, and we're in the process of investigating a certification program for non-energy raters. So to be able to become an approved third party for any jurisdiction to just do blower door testing, duct leakage testing, and fan flow testing.
Sounds like that.
So
We're
Robbie,
probably-
I hear what you're saying, but we've got firsthand knowledge that it's tough to get one in Colorado Springs. So,
Well, it's not that they're not available. There are folks doing this work in Colorado Springs.
okay. I think I was
Put it
going to
out
go
there
to,
have an exemption in jurisdictions that don't require it, right? Because that gives us the option to not require for those jurisdictions that they know they have problems with getting these types of tests, right? And that's why they might not require it for their jurisdiction. And that gives us the ability to get certain products out of this blower door test requirement because that jurisdiction doesn't allow it. But I guess it still creates that issue where does a home still need mechanical ventilation for the whole house ventilation, right?
And what do you mean by that, Donnie? What besides a mini split and some, I mean, what are we talking about? Are like furnaces and like vents to the floor? Because like, what are you talking about when you say that?
So structure requires ventilation, right?
Yeah.
So you get proper air circulation in that home.
Yeah.
But by providing a system, when you're building to the IRC says you have to have a thermal envelope, a water resistive envelope, and your air barrier, right? By creating that air barrier, you start closing up all the gaps that are inside that structure, at least on the envelope part of it, right?
Yep.
But you might not be getting enough circulation in that unit. And so you have to provide that ventilation to allow that air to exhaust to the outdoors, right? Or at least when it's exhausted to the outdoors, having some kind of circulation of air that pulls air back into the unit, right? But that's why they set the minimum requirements for your testing for the blower door test, because that blower door test shows that, yes, this building might be tight, but it's still allowing circulation in that building, right?
Donnie,
Nate, what do you guys do?
say that again, Tracy.
I'm curious what Nate and the big builders do. Because us little builders don't do blower tests because, like I've said,
Most builders along the Front Range are using an exhaust ventilation strategy. but you're allowed by the code to use either an exhaust, a supply, or a balanced ventilation strategy. So
Yep.
when you think of ventilation, most people think immediately of an ERV or an HRV. So that gives you an idea of what's happening
Sure,
with regards to ventilation, but you don't have to use an ERV or an HRV.
right.
So Robbie, what you're talking about stick-built homes, they're using exhaust ventilation, but you're saying that blower door test is still required for every stick-built home?
Yes, up and down the front range from Fort Collins to Larimer County to Colorado Springs and Pueblo. They've been doing blower door tests on every house since the 2012 IECC adoption.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I want to go to you next.
This is real quick. Robbie, going back to what you had mentioned, when I was a HERS rater back east, I did work with some of my co-employees, teaching them how to do the blower door test. And as long as I oversaw the results and everything, are we talking about the same thing, that basically somebody would be trained to do the blower door test? Because the only problem I don't have a problem with that, Sam, just letting you know. But the problem is the equipment from Energy Conservation out of Minnesota. They only build so many units a year, and that was our biggest problem. We had units on back order for like a year before we got them. But are we talking about where we could train, or I'm not a HERS rater anymore, but where they could be trained underneath like a HERS rater to do these tests correctly, and then they would fill out the forms for the blower door test?
Yeah, and basically what we're talking about specifically is Building Performance Institute training and certification under what they call a tester in essence. So
Right.
they're only able to do testing. They're not able to do software things. And in rural areas, they'll definitely be a side business. It won't be their primary business, but you can have somebody who's actually certified that maybe is also a insulator or an HVAC contractor or something like that. And the jurisdiction will be able to have a designation that they can actually use under the approved third-party provisions of the IECC.
And if that's the case, then in that case, Sam, there would be some relief, because there would be additional testers out there available.
Yeah,
They would have to provide the reports back to somebody qualified to do either the ResNet or the ERI to finish it. But Tracy, I don't know how much of an imposition this would put on you guys for somebody to do that paperwork.
all right.
Say that again. Say that again. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sam.
No, Tracy, Mark was just saying that with the program Robbie's talking about, we may get additional testers, and there may be a requirement to submit that blower door test back to the manufacturer, and I would assume building codes and standards to verify. But I want to go to Mike Schmidt real first, and then Mike Morrow, and then Donnie again, and then and we may not get this one done. I'm hoping we can get this one done, but I'm not sure how that's going to play out yet. Mike Schmidt.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, understanding Tracy's concern about the additional burdens and so forth for the tiny house manufacturer. Obviously, I've seen different implementations of venting systems in tiny house designs, two vents, DC powered in and out. And I did put a couple links into the chat about Ventus. They do a lot of work with ductless single room venting systems that really cover this whole area of both. I think it's called the technical term is heat recovery ventilators or energy recovery ventilators. What would be interesting here is that if a tiny house builder put in, say, this Twin Fresh system, it's about a $700 unit. and put it into their system and did a test, a blower door test in the factory, and then got a rating, would that rating be able to be supplied to an authority having jurisdiction, knowing that the unit had this recovery unit built in? It's a standard process accepted by industry, and that if the blower test results were done in the factory, one time for a specific design, could that be applied kind of as a model blower door test? Or is this situation we're talking about that the authority having jurisdiction always has to do a blower test for every single installation? I mean, this is, and again, the blower door tests, I think I found one on Angie. They're like $200 to $350, with third parties. But, are we gonna look at, say, an ASTM E541 standard that can, authenticate, testers? There's a facility for doing that now that E541 has come back online. So it just seems to me that there are the technologies for doing the air exchanging, heat exchanging, energy exchanging that can meet these requirements, for the 3 per hour air exchanges that Donnie's talking about. But it can be done at the factory one time, and then the results of those tests, documented and provided to the authority having jurisdiction.
Mike, that's a good point. I think we could have that discussion on if there is a model one done in the factory, would we carry it forward through plan review and construction, and then provide that to the local jurisdiction? I don't know.
Yeah, this is kind of the tenet, Sam, that our group, the ASTM International Group, is obviously trying to push more towards model code development, where we do things once and don't have to replicate it over and over and over, where there's cost impacts for the builder or cost impacts for the owner.
Yeah, and that's where we're running into some challenges with the code, and that is that my preference is to find something we can do internal to building codes and standards that doesn't leave it up to the local jurisdictions to accept a piece of paperwork, right? But that might be an option too. Mike, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, maybe you guys talk, sorry, I got on late. I'm wondering, why is this specifically being written into the draft administrative rules as a code item, rather than being a part of like the way we've handled the energy code stuff? As far as, I mean, it's a part of the code, we're referencing code, but this one specific thing we're forcing in as a part of the administrative rules, rather than just saying that here's the code. Why is that being done, or what's the explanation there?
So Mike, let me try to explain it. And that is that we were going to take out everything on this page that I'm showing because of the conflicts between IECC 2015 and IRC. This is not any new addition. This has been there. Everything on this page, even the strike through, has been there and before. And we got into the discussion on how are we meeting the mechanical ventilation requirements if we don't do a blower door test. And from my understanding from Robbie is that we have to do a blower door test. And it can't be done in the factory in most cases because the unit isn't complete. So it's not that we're adding anything. It's just saying, how are we going to meet this mechanical ventilation requirement per codes? Does that make sense?
It does. I guess so what we're saying is, written in this way, if I ship a house to Cortez or somewhere where they amend out due to the remote, let's say a rural area, they say that we don't have to do that. We're specifically saying in here that we do, even though that's typically been handled as a in the field on-site item. We're specifically saying that we're going to be above. We're kind of back to that, locally applied energy code, exception. We're saying we have to be above that no matter what.
Well, I mean, the alternative we've talked about is making sure every house has mechanical ventilation, right? And some of those places that don't have any jurisdiction, any local building departments, we're gonna have to figure out what that looks like for us. Building codes and standards, right? Donnie, you've got.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, historically, the way it kind of evolved, it was early in the 09, 012 time period. That's kind of what happened, right? Is there became a requirement where the factory built portion had to meet what was called the state minimum. At that time, I think it started out as 09 and then it became, 12. And I guess in the end, we seem to be in each like code cycle trying to pursue, making sure that we're forcing into the higher standards in the energy part compared to what they may require on site. And I mean, if that's what we're trying to do, I guess I'm just trying to confirm that's the goal.
Well, what we're trying to do right now is to meet the 2015 IECC and the 2018 IRC with respect to mechanical ventilation. Is that everybody else's understanding of what we're trying to do?
Yeah, so Mike, I'm not sure when you jumped in, but the conversation, how this started was, when this exemption was put into the rules back in like the 2018 timeframe, I believe it was to help with the blower testing requirements, right? Trying to find a way to meet the requirement, but not necessarily have to do the testing, right? But what it actually did is it created a conflict with other codes in the IRC that requires a whole house ventilation system, right? And then also natural ventilation. So the thing is with natural ventilation, it's an option. If you want to do it, then you have to do a blower test to figure out if you're making or if you're getting the right amount of air changes per hour, right? So that's an option. So you don't necessarily have to do that, right? But the whole house ventilation system, the code says you either need it or you don't, but you have to prove that you don't need it, right? And so if you do that, or in order to figure that out, you have to do that blow door test. So if you're exempting it in one of our paragraphs, the first paragraph that's crossed out right now, well, how are you supposed to know if you need a whole house ventilation system, right? You would still need to do a blow door test to figure that out. So that's the problem. It created a bit of a conflict. So we're trying to figure out a method to be able to.
That's kind of right, but actually the codes currently require both blower door testing and whole house controlled mechanical ventilation. You're not testing into that requirement. They're both required.
Well,
if you're building a house,
because you don't, but you need to prove that you don't need it, right?
No, you're required to install it regardless of the results of the blower door test, because in the 2018 and below, you have to achieve 3 air changes or less in our climate zones. And in the trigger in the IRC says that anything below 5 air changes, which is the requirement in the other climate zones, has to have mechanical ventilation. Then in the 2021, that trigger switched to just say you have to have mechanical ventilation.
Yeah, but we're not in the 2021 yet. We're still in.
So the requirement, because the requirement is 3 air changes in our climate zones, you have to have mechanical ventilation. It's not that you're testing it to determine if you have to have mechanical ventilation.
And is natural ventilation an option in the 2015 IECC?
No.
Nate, you've got your hand up, or you had your hand up.
I'm good.
Mark?
I guess, let me make sure. Yeah, I guess one thing that I'm looking at, and Robbie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but footnote A underneath that table says where required by the code official, testing shall be conducted by an approved party. Hourly calculations is specific to the ASHRAE Handbook of Fundamentals or the equivalent shall be used to determine the energy loads resulting from the infiltration. I'm a little confused about that statement, always have been, because how will we know what the filtration is if we test? But
yes,
but it does give the part where required by the code official, Sam. Now,
That's with
coming
regards to the heating and cooling loads of the house. So the manual J, S, and D, you take into account ventilation as part of the load.
but with that being said, Robbie, and maybe Tracy can chime in on this real quick. Most of these mini splits, the high efficiency mini splits that we're using now have the ERV or an HRV built into the system.
Yes, humidifiers, yes. We're even getting them for cold climate situations.
Yeah, mini splits do not have ERVs and HRVs linked into them or connected.
No,
into
but
them.
you can add ERVs or HRVs. We're already doing ventilation, like I've said.
So somebody put a great article in the chat about the Tiny Life Consulting, and it linked to ventilation with regards to tiny houses.
Yeah, but that guy's not all that. He also hasn't built 450 tiny houses, so he's a writer. I know who he is, and he gathers information from out there that's not always 100% accurate either. So consider your source, please, on that one. I know what you're showing. I know what you're showing on that one, Mike. I've seen his. I've read some of his stuff, and some of it I don't agree with.
Hey, so Robbie, this is the part that I was talking about in section R303.4 for mechanical ventilation.
Right.
Where the air infiltration rate of a dwelling unit is 5 air changes per hour or less, were tested with the blower door at a pressure of 0.2 inch water column. In accordance with section N1102.4.1.2, the dwelling unit shall be provided with a whole house mechanical ventilation in accordance with section 1505.4.
Yeah.
So what it's saying is, if you're meeting that requirement, then you have to provide the whole house, right? So that's what I was saying.
Yes, that's
You either
correct.
need it or you don't, but you have to prove that you don't.
Where's that at,
That's
Donnie?
correct. All I was saying was that the requirement in climate zones 1 and 2 is 5 air changes per hour. The requirements in climate zones 3 through 8 is 3 air changes per hour. So the requirement is already below 5 air changes per hour. Therefore, you have to put in whole house control mechanical ventilation, regardless of the test.
Are you talking about because of the what's written in the paragraph or written in the code book?
The code book in the energy code gives the air leakage targets per climate zone.
Oh, okay, so you're saying the target zones for, or the climate zones, I guess that are required, the 5 air changes, but automatically have to have mechanical.
Exactly.
Okay.
And our climate zones that require 3 air changes automatically have to have mechanical ventilation. And it's all goes back to the sound building science. Build your house tight to gain control and predictability of airflow, thermal flow, and moisture flow, and ventilate it properly for the occupants and background moisture. That's what the building science is telling us, and that's what's wrapped into the code.
Yeah. So basically, kind of circle back around to what I was saying earlier, is like, if we keep this section here, at least the black area, anything that's between 5 through 7, and it doesn't matter, you would need to have mechanical ventilation. But if you're in climate zones, does it have it in there? Doesn't have it. Well, is it 1
and
through
2.
4?
1 and 2. Yeah,
1 and 2.
Then you would be exempt if you meet that blower test requirement, or at least for the air changes, right? But I guess the second part to why I raised my hand was for the ERI. So the ERI in our paragraph is actually specifically listed there. But if you go to that section in 402.4.2.1, there is no ERI listed in there. Is it part of the ASTM that's required for that testing? Because I was asking earlier if we could just remove the ERI from that portion and just keep the air changes to get that buffer there during the testing, then they don't have to do the ERI for their test. They just have to show that that blower test meets the 3 or the 5. And then the second question I had was for Janine, since they did exempt it from their jurisdiction, what are they doing for their mechanical ventilation systems? At least for the whole house ventilation. Are they just requiring it because they're probably in climate zone 5?
We're in climate zone 6 up here.
6?
In some areas 7, but we do a visual inspection like was provided in the 12 and the 9, if I remember correctly.
No, just
We
the
do a
9.
visual inspection of the ducts. Don't do duct leakage tests because we aren't able to do that. Don't have the trades up here to do that. So we do our best to do visual inspection, make sure that the insulation's installed correctly, make sure that the flashing's installed correctly around the windows. And we do just the visual side of things at this point.
Nate?
I was going to ask the question and Janine kind of led into it. If a local jurisdiction is allowed to write out the requirement because of availability of testing, as Janine just outlined, why can't we under those same circumstances?
So Nate, I don't disagree with you. And as you know, as the TAC can recommend amendments to any of the codes that we have adopted. And that's why we have the whole section 2, right? Is we adopt the baseline codes as amended. So I think what we're going to have to do is take a look at an amendment to the codes regarding mechanical ventilation and testing. And we need to do that pretty darn quick.
So who performs this ERI, this energy rating index? Is that within the res check that we did?
No, it's an energy rater. It's an energy rating index.
Yeah, and how do you score that? Where do you get that? Where's the link? Is it like a res check thing, like what we've already done?
No, it's a software model that you have to be a certified energy rater to have access to the software.
Yeah, it goes through ResNet.
It's a third party you hire.
Yeah, so that's what I'm asking. Could we take that part out since it's not actually a testing requirement for the blower test?
Thank you, Donnie.
All right, if anybody would like to work with me on this, shoot me a private email or let me know and we'll try to get this wrapped up within the next day or 2.
I think Mark Lindsay would be a prime candidate for that. Or Robbie.
Actually, Robbie, if you don't have my contact information, can you get with Sam or Donnie? There's a couple of things. I know we discussed a lot about tiny homes. I've never done tiny homes, but I've done a ton of multi-wides and other stuff. There's a couple of things though that when we have done smaller buildings that run into issues with, and maybe you've got a couple of solutions that we can give to Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is that you're going to be using a duct blaster instead of a blower door to test it. That unit.
Exactly, because even the E-ring doesn't work on that small of a home.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're good to go. I've wrote down a couple names of people I want on that. And if anybody else wants to be on that, let me know. And we'll try to wrap that up in the next day or 2. We are going to have to go to a higher energy code in 25, I think. So this problem isn't going away. And I'm hesitant of just kicking it down the road until then. We need to get these rules done and we need a solution that works for all factory built structures in the industry. Janine?
Yeah, I'll go back to, this is a code for the whole state of Colorado.
Yep.
Not just the rural areas. So we need to make sure that we apply this code as we would for the whole state. Park County can make their own amendments. You know, Boulder County can make their own amendments to make it more restrictive if they want. So I would say don't mess with it because it's a good transition into the next level of codes that we're going to have. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Janine. You're exactly right. Okay.
I have one last question, maybe.
Yes,
This
Robbie.
section that you have on the screen, R 402.4.2.1. I'm not finding it in the 2015 IECC, so I'm trying to find where this came from in the first place.
That's a really good question, Robbie.
Because
I
if
think this was-
if it's referencing the ERI, it should be an R 406 heading number.
Okay.
Right. Part of this was a hybrid at the time, Robbie. This was because of 2009 was adopted by most of the jurisdictions in there. Part of this, the original rule was like I said, like a hybrid of the 2009, 2012, and 2015.
Okay, so this is a separate, is this the modular code or that's trying to be adopted or adapted to fit tiny homes then? And it was just kind of comboed together from a bunch of different codes?
Well, this wasn't put in for tiny homes. This is
Right, it was not.
Yeah, this has been in everything you see on that screen, Robbie, including the strikeout, was in the pre-administrative rules since at least 19.
Okay, that answers the question. It's from the administrative rules, not from the actual IECC.
Yeah, but there's
Okay.
at some point it should tie back to
Right.
IECC. Or otherwise, the rule doesn't make any sense. The reference doesn't make any sense. So what
The issue at the time was doing single wide, small single wides, like the 44 footers that don't qualify as they're bigger than a HUD, or they were modular built and didn't meet the HUD program, but they were still small, like ADUs and stuff like that are underneath the modular program, Robbie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go back to my main slide. So through the third bullet, the fourth bullet, some comments received after 320 have not been fully reviewed. And I think that you know that I sent the entire administrative rules with kind of an overview email to over 900 and I think the number was 945 stakeholders. That included every local building department, everybody in the Salesforce database for factories, both residential and non-residential, installers, sellers, third-party agencies, basically every contact that I had. So I have gotten a fairly good response, let's say in the 5% range, and I'm still weeding through those. Most of those comments have more questions than they have comments. I also got some late comments from TAC folks. Those will get priority resolution before we file this week. And then I'll do a summary of all the comments that we've gotten and questions going forward. And then that's part of what we'll also be briefing to the State Housing Board on our outreach to the industry. Does that make sense to everybody? Robin, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, I had sent in, and I know that there's some others that have sent in some things. One of the things I noticed on the current draft in 2.2.7, I was really interested in seeing if the loft landing could be defined as an integral part of the loft for the emergency egress requirements. Will we be getting any information about that before you have to publish it or send this forward in the next 2 days, or how is that going to play out there?
So this is the question on, I don't think 2.7.7 dealt with the, what was the reference number on egress?
It was 2.2.7.
2.2.7.
Yeah, I just wanted to see that the loft landing could be made a integral part of the loft, so that would give the builders more options for the emergency.
Yep, and I do remember your email, Robin. Let me get you an answer on that. Unless there's people here that want to discuss that. Janine, you still got your hand up. I don't know if you've had another comment. All right, Robin, I took a note on that. Wildfire risk, we added that to 2.2.1. Any questions or concerns on that? And then if not, on multifamily, we have been a little challenged in getting all the things updated, but we had a good meeting on 3/24 with an expert in multifamily installations for factory built. He's working on some wording as far as the installation piece of that. And once we get that in, I think it was supposed to come in today or yesterday. We'll take a look at that. And at the end of the day, guys, when I will send out, hopefully before we go to press, but remember, I have that little grace window of 10 days of what we actually file before we, either before the day or the same time we file it. And then we'll work out any other issues in that grace period. But I don't think there's going to be anything major. Would anybody like to talk about multifamily installations? Mike, I know this is something that you've been addressing too. Mike Morrow. Mike Schmidt, I'm not planning on multifamily tiny homes at this point in time.
Yeah, we understand. That'll be obviously the next pass. So
Yeah, thanks.
yeah.
No, Sam, my only, I guess I think everybody here, we've kind of went through and sent you all of our feedback on that. I think the biggest concern is it feels like the small scale residential attached townhomes, rolling that in to be considered like an IBC apartment building. That just feels like the wrong place to draw that line. To treat those like the fourplex, or that we do right now, that's essentially a small scale residential attached building. It feels like it's getting rolled into the big scale of the big 24 unit apartment building in terms of an inspection and a fee. That doesn't feel right to us, but that's probably specifically because we're working on a lot of those type of projects right now, and we don't like it.
Okay. And so you want to keep those fourplexes as IRC?
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of the current code, the way they're, you're talking about from a code book standpoint, an IBC multifamily apartment building that has a completely different code approach on site and in the building versus a residential attached structure, right? So to me and to everybody here, we think they should be, because they're not the same type of building. I guess that's why.
Right. And I agree, they're not the same type of building. Donnie and then Nate.
Yeah, so Mike, like if you look at our definitions for multifamily, the IRCs that would fall within that definition, they fall within that definition. And my understanding when we made this was that is because of 9-5, Title 9-5 of our state requirements, right? So if you meet that threshold, you have to have certain accessibility for those types of units, but not necessarily saying that that residential building is now a commercial building. it's still going to be reviewed under the IRC and then just meet those 9-5 requirements if applicable, right? And so we're just considering it a multifamily unit because it is a multifamily, I guess, housing building. There's more than one family living in that entire building. It's just, it's still going to be reviewed under the IRC. It's just considered multifamily. So when we get the plan reviews and inspections, it's just going to be associated as a multifamily, not necessarily as being reviewed to commercial requirements.
No, I know, that's what I'm saying, though. Now it's gonna fall into this plan review and inspection program that, in my opinion, the original intent of that, as we discussed it, was all of these IBC apartment buildings, but now this little residential attached thing, I have the fees and the approval and the installation, the whole thing. I'm going to be in that program. It sounds like when I really don't, when it's just not, that's not what the multifamily, that to me, that's not what it is. It shouldn't be that way.
No, I think really what it's really doing is just, we're just classifying that building in Salesforce as multifamily. The inspection process is going to be the same, because like if you're doing an apartment building, their chances are going to have a bunch of inspections that they're calling out, right? But if you're doing one building at a time, it's not going to really change anything. It's really just the administrative part of categorizing it when we receive it. I don't think there's any multifamily plan review fee or anything that's specific to multifamily. These new buildings, or not these new buildings, these multifamily buildings that are classified under the definition of multifamily, will just get a different insignia for the installation and the certification process. But the process is the same. It just gets, visually, there's a different marker for it. That's it. That's all it is.
Okay, well, it sounded like the whole thing, there's a to be determined installation fee, and it just sounded like it was falling into this different category, which seemed kind of, as you can know, the unknown is kind of scary. So
yeah, so I think that's going to be something that we'll have to look at, and should actually split that apart, because like a townhouse is going to be a little bit different, but it just depends on the development, right? If you're doing like 7 or 8 buildings and they're like 3 stories high, you might need an inspector there to do the installation process the entire time, right? We'll look into that part. I do see that part being a little confusing.
yeah, no, and that, the whole original point of the conversation was the multifamily installations, which I totally agree with. If I'm doing a 30 box apartment, that's kind of hard to figure that that's the same as a 2-section or even a 4-section building, right? So I totally understand that. It just, I don't know. It feels like a simple small scale building's fell on the wrong side of the line somehow. So
I'll try to clarify that, Mike.
okay.
Nate, you've had your finger up for a while.
I think the reason why this is okay, the way it's kind of written, is because we've clarified that third-party inspection agencies can do the installation inspections. And so from Mike's standpoint, the way I view this is basically for buildings that have a larger unit count. Basically, the Division of Housing is saying, hey, what's your inspection plan for this building, right? But the important part is, in the past, I'd be like, what's your inspection plan involving us? But now it's going to be, oh, our inspection plan involves third-party inspection company camping out there for 3 days doing the inspections during the set. And Division of Housing says, okay, sounds good to us. We just want to make sure you had a plan. Kind of how I read the section.
Okay. Thank you. Well, and then we talked a little bit, my next bullet is the feast. Anybody else want to talk about multifamily? Mark, you had your hand up for a minute. Did you change your mind?
No,
You
Donnie did a pretty good job about addressing how this is separated, because the townhomes are still underneath the IRC as long as they don't exceed the number of stories. I guess the particular on that is with the townhome, it has structural independence, of course, so it is treated as an individual dwelling. So at that point, it's still underneath the IRC.
Yep. Okay, great. Fee study, we talked briefly about that. We're almost done. I made a note. We'll figure out the installation for multifamily. But again, Nate was right on point. If we're having a cluster of buildings or a single 4-unit go up, let's talk before we get to that point and figure out, coordinate with the local jurisdiction and us, and the factory and the manufacturer and the third-party agencies that are involved, and come up with a plan. And I think you'll see some of that wording coming out of the multifamily installation wording that we're going to get. One of the things that we had a recommendation for is a set plan. How's that going to go in, right? And how do we tie the inspections with that set plan for these more complex structures? Donnie, did I capture that right?
I believe so. Sorry, Sam. I wasn't fully paying attention there.
Okay, I don't want you drifting off, because then I'll start calling on Amelia. All right.
Hey.
And for you guys late to the game, Amelia's the new administrative lead. She's going to be working with the program coordinators and Donnie and myself. So welcome to her. And then Christina is our lurker in the background. She does FB and FB&R. She's a little camera shy. I don't even know if she's still on. Yeah, there she is, still on the call. But I appreciate having staff on here to see how this process works. All right. And
Sam, one real quick question, and I know it's Nate's favorite. When we start doing townhomes, the CRS 9-05, does your department get involved with anything on the scoring of the points for accessibility for those buildings? Like Mike was saying, we're at 4. If we're at 4, we're okay. But if we get to 6, guess what? We may have a problem.
yes, we are involved with that accessibility determination. Is that right, Donnie?
Yes.
We do. Our scope is the structure itself. Anything outside that structure is up to the locals. So if there's any accessibility requirements for those units, we do the review for the accessibility of those units, make sure they're providing the minimum number, and then that those specific units are being constructed how they're supposed to be for the type of accessibility they're supposed to, type A, B, or whatever
Steve,
do it with. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, and that's why we need that kind of huddle with everybody, because we're not going to take care of parking lots and ramps and things like that.
Right.
That's going to be the locals.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, Nate's even wagging his head. Yeah.
It makes sense. It's the only way to do it. It's a pain because
It is a
everybody's
pain.
got to talk to everybody to get everybody on the same page, but it works. So,
Wouldn't that be a great world, Nate?
right.
So, and I say that tongue in cheek. We have done those accessibility requirements for units outside of local jurisdiction for a while. It's just, we think there's going to be a lot more of them. So just want to make sure we deconflict as much as possible going forward.
Well, the issue is that basically, even if we have 4 module or 4-unit townhomes, if we put 6 of those 4-unit townhomes on the same site, the way the code addresses it is it's a site analysis, not a particular building.
Correct.
And that's where we run into a little bit of a problem.
Yeah,
And
I know.
what can we help? How can we help with that problem, Mark?
I don't think there's anything we can help with that because that's a CRS 9.5 wording
Well, I still
thing.
think during the plan review, we should probably at least bring it up
Yeah.
like we did before, Nate. I think at least needs to come up, and then at that point, the local can get involved, I guess.
Yeah.
I
The
mean,
issue comes.
we've got a couple locals on here. We could ask them.
So if we need to come up with a checklist, or when we see plans come in for a multifamily that's 6 or more units, I mean, if it's not clear what you're planning to do with accessibility, we're going to ask you, or kick it back.
Exactly.
Yeah, so right now, I think Greg does a pretty good job of, he sees a group of townhomes come in, because it might not be, the plan review might not come in and meet the requirement, like it stands out and says like, hey, we're 9-5. Because sometimes they come in like 4
At a time.
townhomes, but it's
Yeah.
part of a bigger development. So he'll kick back and just say like, hey, or he'll reach out and say like, hey, is this part of a bigger development? Because you might follow within 9-5. So I think Greg does a pretty good job at catching those. But sometimes they do get a little confusing, and it might go through the review process and not be the 9- or not be flagged for 9-5.
Exactly
Yeah.
right, Donnie. I mean, if there's a plan that comes in and the site plan's not provided, I don't know if we have authority to ask for a site plan, but yeah, the question should be asked, are additional units on site?
I actually think it's in our checklist that if you are doing those types of units, that you provide the site plan so we can do that. I'll double check though real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that question will be, you know, is this that's that early discussion where we sit around and have a cup of coffee and say, is this a phase of a larger construction project? And how many units are you looking at totally coming in? You know, and what's the timing and all that. So that's just coordination, I think. All right, so
Real quick.
the next one, the multifamily installation fee, we talked a little bit about that. And then 4.9.6.1 was added to kind of expand on what 4.9.6 was talking will be conducted.
What is that?
I don't know. I'm looking it up too. Anybody remember that off the top of their head? 4.9 had to do with, I think it's the new 4.9. Why is it not showing up in my one I just printed? Maybe it's the old 4.9. Yeah, it's the old 4.9 because I started renumbering. It's the new 4.12. The performance criteria for monitoring manufacturers and third-party inspection agencies utilizes a combination of qualitative analysis based on deficiencies identified during inspection, a qualitative analysis based on systemic failures, and recurring serious deficiencies. So what I've tried to do is take that document, which we're going to work on after we get the rules done, and try to give the 3 major categories of how that's how that will be determined. And that came from DOH asking for clarification. Well, it actually came from other places too, on clarification on how we're going to deal with the certified manufacturer status.
So what's the new number, Sam? 4.412?
Yeah, 412. And it's in a section where the Division of Housing may immediately, and 412 is the new one, may immediately remove the added designation of certified manufacturer status outside of Rules 7. I got to double check that. For any of the following issues. And there was request to clarify what the performance criteria for monitoring manufacturers and third-party inspection agency document looked at.
So from a 4.9.6.1 standpoint, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Just on record, I don't think we necessarily need to add it in writing, but that changes to that document need to involve stakeholders or TAC.
Sure, that's
You
my
know,
plan.
yeah.
As we go
Agree.
through all these documents, as we look at the new OC form, as we look at the new thing, you know, we're going to have regular meetings with the TAC, and we may be monthly for a while as we look at some of these implementation documents and policy documents that are coming down the road. I do want to involve the TAC in all those we'll do our best to make everybody happy, but at the end of the day, I'm not gonna make everybody happy. I'll do the best I can.
Yeah,
But we want
this,
to make sure you guys know what we're discussing, and I want to hear if there's impacts to local building departments. I want to hear if there's impacts to sellers. I want to hear if there's impacts to manufacturers, right?
Yeah.
So we can work through those.
this document has largely been a sleeper in the Division of Housing for
There's a bunch
years.
of sleeper documents that I think we need
And
to
so,
take a
but
look
with
at.
the way we rewrote this, it becomes a very, very prominent document for factories to keep
There's
their.
even stuff in the
certification.
code. You just heard us talk about 2.7.7.
Yeah.
That seems to have been a sleeper
Yeah.
change also, right?
Yeah, right.
We can only do what we can do to get stuff cleared up.
I'm good with
Yeah,
it.
I
I still
think
like
we
the
need
way
to-
that, I still like the way that certification is headed. And I think it's gonna be, Mike, you might not be the only one in the certification club here soon.
No, I just, to what Nate said, I think what the time and the people that we devote to involving it, I think that will be very important. Because right now that document, yeah, it tightened up, cleaned up, however you want to call it, and it's going to take some time. So.
Yep, thank you. All right, so the next one, we're gonna leave the 3-year manufacturer registration period in. Administratively, the division likes it, except for finance. Finance, and Tony, I see your hand up. I'll come to you in just a second. Finance doesn't like it because they're not able to roll deferred revenue into future years. So it's going to jack up my budget, basically, is the nice way to say that. So what we're going to do is we're going to bill you every year for that. But that will allow you to keep your plans renewed unless we have unless we have a code change. But manufacturers will have a 3-year registration or a 1-year option. We realize that it might be difficult for some of the smaller manufacturers to do to do a 3-year right up front. They can certainly do that if they want to. And
Okay, so
Tracy,
they'll have the option, Sam?
I'm sorry?
You said we'll have the option of doing 1
Yes.
or 3? That's
1 or
fair.
3. And don't ask for 2, Tracy. 1 or 3.
Gee, Sam.
All right, maybe just for you. No, I'm kidding, Tracy.
No, I think that's perfect because I
Okay.
think you have,
That's
some
an
folks
option.
that are just going to do it for a year, right? They're just going to build their own house or, maybe they're just building 1 or 2. So, and they don't know if they're going to do it again. Because trust me,
Right.
we have a lot of those.
Yeah. Tawny?
Thanks, Sam. This is Tawny with the Rocky Mountain Home Association. So Sam, you said something that I wonder if it just needs to be clarified in rule, and that is the plan renewals, that the plans won't expire unless there's a code change. I think that it's important. to
Yeah,
note
I
that.
did put it in there that the plans will expire with factory registration expiration. And so if it's a 1-year, then those have to be, we have a resubmittal process for plan renewals, whether you're on the 1-year or the 3-year plan. So it will tie with the manufacturer registration period of 1 year or 3 year. Does that answer your question?
Well, so just to clarify, so if a factory is registering for 3 years, they choose the 3-year option, then any of the plans that are approved during that period, they would not have to resubmit for approval again unless there's a code change.
Until the end of 3 years.
Correct.
That is absolutely correct. I lose about $11,000 a year on that, but I think that's going to be okay.
But so
I think-
what about the scenario where within the last 6 months of a 3-year registration, they're getting plans approved, that they're going to build on the other side of their renewal? Do those plans expire at their renewal?
Yes.
So if somebody gets a plan reviewed 1 month before the renewal is up, they shouldn't have to have a plan reviewed 30 days later.
Donnie, how,
We work with them. We try to keep an eye on that. But if they're gonna expire soon, we're like, hey, did you submit your application for renewal? And they're like, yeah, we already have it in the system. And we're like, okay, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to get that done as soon as possible. And then so when we approve your plans, and we'll kind of hold off on approving the plan until after we renew their registration so that they have the same expiration dates. So we don't just say like, hey, you know, you're approving, or we're approving this a month ahead of your expiration, you're gonna have to renew again when you expire, right? We don't do that. We try to work with them and we say like, hey, you're about to expire. What we're gonna do is we're gonna try to get them both done around the same time, but we will have the same expiration date.
Why
for
if
the
they,
future.
So
Why-
remember, Nate, you can start construction once the third-party agency approves the plan. And then for the state stamp, it might be the day after your registration's renewed. It's not different from what we've been doing in the past.
why don't we make it so when they get a renewal, they get a renewal on their plans as well?
Well, then you would have to pay all those fees for all the renewals. But
Why?
not everybody wants to renew every single one of their plans. We actually don't get a lot of renewals.
What about it? What about if they have approval on plans that aren't built yet? Renew those.
If they want to renew them, then they have to let us know they want to renew them. Because we don't want to.
My point is that a lot of times a factory will send in an approval, you know, a plan set, you know, 3-4 months before they actually build it, right? Because they know how long we've had that conversation. And so my point is that if that is right around a renewal of their registration time point, that shouldn't really matter. That shouldn't keep them from sending in a plan set because it's going to automatically expire. Just like at a local building department, your plan gets approved, it's approved for a period of time. And so I guess my point is like, if you get to that renewal stage, I understand not wanting to give a 3-year look back extension on all plans that were approved, but what if it was for any ones that aren't built yet? Where those automatically extend into the new review, into the new renewal period, just the not built ones. Because it's just, that's an odd thing to have to manage. Like, hey, here's a plan review 2 months before our renewal, so we're not going to approve it because we need to wait to stamp it later. Like, that's goofy, I think.
Well, the other thing, Nathan, like I said, we don't get very many renewals, right? Because chances are, if you're submitting a plan to us, you plan on building that in the near future, right? It's not going to
3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, it's not going to sit there for 3 years, right? Because chances are
No, absolutely not. Yeah, right.
Like I said, we work with them on the submittal. If they're submitting, if they're like, hey, this plan's about to expire here next month, but our registration, we already submitted that. We'll work with them to put the new date on those plans so they have that new expiration timeline, right? But a lot of the time, like I said, we I wouldn't say rarely get renewals. We just don't get enough of them that we would want to, I guess, automatically renew anything, or it's really specific to the factory if they want to renew those plans. And especially if we're doing a 3-year renewal, I find it hard to believe that they're going to wait 2 or 3 years to build that plan.
No, I'm literally only going for the ones that are like, you know, within the normal schedule of business, you know, like the 3 to 4 months before the renewals.
A buffer within 90 days or so.
Yes, right.
So I think I was just going to read that part here in the rule. It says an application will expire and all fees fortified if that not completed within 120 days. I would say we can probably work that in with a plan, but you got to realize that if you haven't, if you wait the 120 days for your renewal of your application, you shouldn't be building within that 120 days. And we find a lot of the times that the factory is still building during that time frame, right? So we really have to make sure that the factory understands that if you expire, if your expiration is expired, you can't build within that time frame, right? We try to project that as much as possible, but with everybody's timelines, they continue with that process. Even if they started a build right before they expired, they're still building that unit, right? I would say not every factory, but there are factories that we find that are still building while they're expired. So we're trying to work on both ends here. You know, when you're expired, you're expired. but let's try to get you, let's work with you. I don't think we've ever, well, we don't have a fee for a late registration, at least not yet. But we try to work with them just like, hey, if you're building, we just need to know what unit you started building while you're not registered so that we can at least track it and say, okay, are you covered? Make sure that everything's fine. So when we do approve the plan for the renewal, it still counts toward, you know, a good standing. We don't want to punish you for trying to house these people, right? But at the same time, you have to make sure you're maintaining your registration too.
All right,
We send out emails 60 days, 30 days, and when you are expired to register, right? But we still get people that are late registers. They're not submitting all the documentation, so it extends past their registration date. So we do what we can to work with them.
we'll see what we can do is to put a buffer in there someplace.
Yeah.
Tawny?
And thank you, Sam. Yeah, so I would like to just echo what Nate was communicating about these plan approvals that are submitted, you know, within a short period of time prior to a factory's registration renewal. That has been a comment that I've received from other factories over the years. You know, just, you know, their question is to why do they have to pause or wait or delay or rush a project just because of their renewal period? If there was a way to add that to the rules, you know, an exception. You know, it wasn't that long ago that our factories had excessive backlogs and they were still submitting their plans for approvals, but, you know, unfortunately they weren't able to build them in the time frame that, you know, they were hoping to because of the excessive backlogs. And so just putting in those safeguards for the factory so that they're not adding additional cost to the renewal of those plans when that structure has not been reviewed, has not been built, would be super helpful.
Okay.
I guess my question, Sam, is to kind of like Montevilla or Champion and these bigger builders. Is it taking you more than 2 years to build a plan after you submit it?
I don't think any of them are on it. The answer is absolutely not. But
Well,
it might
No.
take them, it might take them 6 months. And if
Yeah.
the renewal comes up in that 6 months, all of a sudden they can't build that plan anymore. And that's kind of odd. That's all.
Right, or even if it's a multifamily project, you know, I mean, something that I'm hearing even more nowadays is these, you know, these big multifamily projects where it's taking a long time to get all of the local approvals, et cetera, done. You know, and so if there's just a way to just make that process more efficient and, you know, from a time and a financial perspective, I think that would be helpful. I don't think I mean, it could be a 2-year project. I know there's a project, it's not a factory built one, but the one down at Broadway, down by Alameda. I remember attending a luncheon, I think it felt like 10 years ago that they were talking about that project, and it's finally now under construction. So
Yeah.
some projects do take a long time to get built.
I don't think, Donnie, I don't think we're looking for 2 years. I think it's a statement that just to draft something ideally is something like that's like any unbuilt plants that were approved in the prior 6-month period up until the renewal are extended into the new renewal period. Any unbuilt plants that are outside of 6 months before the renewal period need to pay a renewal fee. You know, it's just something so that the normal course of business cadence doesn't get caught up in having to be renewed. That's all.
Okay.
There
Yeah.
might be a way to pull plan renewals out of factory registration and just age them. Is that what you're talking about, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Anything
normal
that's
at building
over a year
department.
old
I mean,
that
Janine,
isn't built, would the factories be okay, or manufacturers be okay in a renewal fee and not tying it with registration, or?
yeah,
One
if
year
it
old
goes over
stuff,
so long, I think
2-year-old
that's a great
stuff.
idea. Yeah.
But, and Tony, I get your point on the multifamily. That may be a multi-year type project, especially if you're looking at 10 clusters of multifamilies buildings.
Yeah, right. But I mean,
Those are gonna be one-offs, right?
they're going to be one-offs. And the thing is, if you get an approval that's 2 years out, I don't think that, and there's a building code change that we go through or something like that. I don't think that that's going to stand. Like that's going to have to come up and be updated to the current plans or whatever. It's just the normal cadence of business that we're trying to cover.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Tony. I do like the idea of each individual plan having an expiration date that's not tied to the renewal of the factory. I mean, that might create some opportunities for the same structure to be built for multiple customers, which may also reduce just overall housing costs.
Just kind of throw it out there. I think the way that the reason why they set it up this way is because technically you're not supposed to be building unless you're registered. So that's why they set up the expiration date to expire when your registration expired.
But I think those are two different things. If you have a plan approved, but you become unregistered, you can't build it, even though you have a plan approved, because you're not registered. I think they can be on separate fronts. They don't have to be connected, because if a factory has a plan approval that goes beyond their registration date and they don't re-register, they don't have the right to build that because they're not registered anymore, even though they have a plan set that happens to be approved.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out, because I don't know when that was done and how that was done and why it was done.
Yeah.
But that's my assumption, is that's why they linked the two.
Yeah, that's my assumption too, Donnie.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that, hey, you and I can do anything we want now. We don't have any adult leadership.
And would it be helpful to put in the rules, and so something else, I don't know if I can add this because it's not part of your list, Sam, but but maybe add into the rules that, if a manufacturer's registration expires, then all of the approved plans, DOH approved plans
Yeah.
are also expired and are
No,
not
that's what it
authorized
says
for-
now. That's what it says now, is that it expires with their registration. I think we have to add something that says if a plant, if a factory's registration expires, they have to stop construction.
I think the way
Their
to
plans
think
don't
of it,
expire.
Tony, might be is a factory, if a factory fails to renew their registration, all plans are no longer valid.
That's easy enough, but I think that the industry would appreciate that versus trying to beat the clock or wait on the
I like
clock.
that. I think if you said if a renewal, if a factory becomes unregistered,
Yeah.
then their plans automatically expire. That's fine, because factories need to keep up with that.
I
Yeah.
was on the fault of the factory, because let's say we fall behind, right? And they already submitted before they expire, but we renew them after their expiration date. That's our fault. We'll continue. So just clarify that on the fault of the factory. If they fail to renew, like they submit the application after expiration date, then it's,
Yeah.
then they fall.
Understand,
within-
you could write that to cover their efforts versus yours. Yeah.
Yeah, just I guess to clarify it. Yeah.
All right.
So one of the things that I just want to throw out there, and I think it kind of blends in with the next bullet, is so the new 4.16. 4.16. I'm confused, and I know that somebody's explained this to me before, but I don't remember why. Why is it that I'm speaking specifically to the factories where there's multiple locations. Like I'm going to use like the Claytons or the Champions, Skylines, Fleetwood, etc., where there's multiple factories owned under the same parent company. If the plans are approved, why can't those structures be built by a different factory under that same ownership umbrella, as long as they're registered with the state?
So that's a very good question, Tony. And the way that I understand it is that when we look at the QA manual and we look at the list of personnel and the QA program, and the factory gets an inspection, that it is a factory specific. We don't approve every Clayton or Champion factory with a single submission. We would have to look at it. If they want to transfer a plan from one unit, from one factory, if a manufacturer wants to move a plan from one factory to another factory and it's registered, it's just going to be a resubmittal, but that factory's name has to be tied to that unit where it is produced.
So you have an internal process to allow that. It's just not a unadministered process. They can't do it without informing you and
Yeah,
letting you know. Okay.
yeah.
We change all the information. We make sure that they update the plans to reflect that it's the new factory. We actually just did that for one of our builders that bought another factory. So, yeah.
Is there a discount?
Well, for the plan, yes. I mean, because it's basically a renewal of an approved plan underneath another factory.
Correct.
So it pays the renewal rate or resubmission rate, whatever it is we call it, to go through the plan review again.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mark, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, hey, Donnie, isn't the certificate of insignia based on the address of where the unit ships from? That has always been the thing in Colorado. It's where that unit ships from is where that plan has to be approved for and those insignia are issued to.
Well, when you purchase the insignia, it's on the account that who purchases it, right? There's like, let's say Champion, for instance, they have multiple Champion factories.
Right.
Champion York, if they purchase an insignia, it's not linked to both factories because they're purchasing from their Champion York account. So that number is assigned to that account, which gets assigned to the unit itself.
So to answer Tony's question, basically, if you do assign this to another location for construction, the insignia would still be underneath, like you said, York, not the new location.
Yeah, it would still be under York's because they're the one that purchased that number, right?
And they cannot transfer insignia, and they cannot transfer insignia, correct?
I would have to check with DeWanda to see if we can change the information on the insignia to link with the new account. That's really one of those going to be one of those one-off type of situations. So I'm not sure if it's going to be happening not a lot, but if it does happen, that's something I would have to check with DeWanda to see if we can change the information on the actual transaction log.
Yeah, there are,
New account.
For those of you that don't know DeWanda, she's our Salesforce guru and does all our programming internally for us. So it's really just an IT challenge.
Yeah.
Nate,
Question.
you had your hand up again?
yeah.
One quick,
is-
wait, whoa, Nate, just hang on. I wasn't done.
Mark,
One last question. There used to be a notifier that went out to the manufacturers when their registration was expiring. It hasn't been happening for a while. Is that going to happen again?
you should be getting notifications at 90, 60, and 30 days, if I remember right, Donnie. Is that right? Nope, you're muted yourself.
Sorry, it's 60, 30, and when you expire.
Okay, because then I gotta get with a couple of manufacturers because they're telling me they received no notifications on it.
Yeah, that system is set up to sing and dance like that. So if they've changed who should be getting that, they need to let us know because
That could be, yeah, that could be.
I think Mark too is I would talk to him and just let him know like, hey, this is your registration. You should probably set your own reminders as well. Because it's the factory should have some kind of responsibility of making sure they're registered.
I agree with you, Donnie, and you and I have dealt with a couple of them here in the last couple of months. You know how it's been going.
I mean, people change and emails don't get changed, and I understand that. And so I guess it would probably behoove us to take a look at failed emails that are coming back and letting somebody else at the plant know, and maybe we can do that. Amelia, maybe you can do that in your spare time, or Christina.
The other thing too is the plans are stamped with the expiration date. So
Right.
The factories have notification every time they get an approved set of plans from the state.
Christina
Which
just
goes
put a
back-
note in the chat that we're only allowed one contact for expirations, and factories need to keep that info updated with us. But Christina, my question then is, do we get a failed email if it doesn't get delivered? Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, we'll have to check our DOH emails, see if we're getting any kickbacks, but a lot of the times there's just personnel changed and maybe they just went to a different department.
Yep.
There's no longer there. Yeah.
Well, is there a way to verify this back when because we renew QA manuals every renewal?
Sorry, Mark, I don't really understand what you're saying.
Basically, when we have to renew the QA manual every time that they renew with you guys.
Right.
So that contact should be in that QA manual. Is there, what's Christina said? That's
Yeah, who the responsible party is, right?
Yeah, we should know who the third party is, and we should also know who the contact should be. If it's the QAM, then if that QAM has changed, why wasn't it changed to you guys?
Yeah, so Christina's comments, she said that's the information that she confirms when she's doing the Salesforce account.
Awesome.
But
Nate?
they're not on the call, but the whole one parent company, two factories, we don't have a lot of those that serve the state, so it's not an issue, but there is one that does operate out of two factories, and just food for thought. I think, giving them the flexibility from a business owner standpoint to be able to send production to one factory or the other, we should have a process for that. I realize that, we can try to make sure that our approval level for each of them is equivalent, meaning their QA programs and all that kind of stuff are equivalent, and staffing is equivalent, and all the things that go into that process. But I just think from a business friendly system, they should have the ability somehow within DOH to say, hey, you know what, we're going to build this one here, we're going to build that one there, and just set up whatever systems you guys need to allow them to make those transfers without it being like a resubmittal type process.
Let's sit down and talk through that.
But
I want to make sure we tie the manufacturer should be responsible for the build, right? We need to know where that unit's built.
yeah. And so anyway, that's all. I think it's worth.
If it's a plan that goes from between 1, 2, 3, or 4 different factories, all those factories are going to have to be registered to make the process easier to go with one plan set to all 4 of them. Let's just talk about how many units we're talking about and what that looks like for them.
And that's a specific phone call with them. So yeah, we'll do that offline.
Tim,
Because we've got one wild card that Donnie and I have to deal with quite a bit, and that's basically on the commercial side. I know we focus a lot of residential in the TAC, but on the commercial side, Donnie and I have to deal with shells that are being sent to an integrator, and they're completed at the integrators, then shipped from the integrator to the site.
Oh, yeah, right. I hadn't thought about that, Mark.
yeah, that's what I was going to say is that we need to, when we have that conversation, let's see what they're doing at those other factories, because if they're producing an open paneled system, technically they wouldn't fall within our jurisdiction. So we wouldn't have to register them, right? But the people that are finishing the product to the closed panel state, everything has to be inspected at that point for the roughs, right, at the factory anyway. So they would be, I think it'd be okay for that type of system, as long as that previous factory is not closed, doing any kind of closed paneled portions. Okay.
Or the other side of this that I run into is they've got a contractual agreement that they're going to put a CDOH label on that before it goes to the integrator.
Yeah, and those ones are some one-off ones that we have seen,
Exactly.
because they'll build a shell, like a complete shell. It goes to the next factory, and then they put everything on the inside,
Right.
and then they still want to certify it as a U structure when it's actually a H, right? So it can get confusing. So yeah, we need to have those conversations though.
Yeah, let's not get off in the woods on it, but Sam, that's something that we have to deal with quite a bit. And that it's really not clear in the rules and everything on how this is supposed to be handled. And Donnie and I deal with it quite a bit. And it's just, sometimes it's just a real headache to.
And is that a commercial problem only, or is it also exist in FB?
I don't think it does so much in residential, Donnie, do you?
No, I haven't seen it. I think that what Nate mentioned is the first time I've heard of a factory like that, but like I said, we can have those conversations offline.
You got it.
All right, and I'm not opposed to adding something in the rules, but I'm already starting a list for the next round of rulemaking. We're not going to get it all done this time. We're going to make it as well as we are. The other point I wanted to make is that, you know, even if we make it the best we can, once tiny home production starts this way, there may be some challenges that are brought back. Nate, what else do you have?
I was wondering if we were done with this item and we could do 4.13 and 4.32.
I think we can, but I want to go to Tawny real quick. Tawny, I don't know if we cut you off, but did you get all your input in on the rules?
I have just, so the only other thing that I have is, I mean, it's on page 35, the very bottom, number 4.26. You can't tell, 4.2613. It's all very confusing. But I'm just wondering why it doesn't include local jurisdictions. Is there just a way to remove all of the agencies?
The new 4.26 under inspections, is that what you're talking about?
Correct. Yes. So the very last statement on page 35,
Oh,
where
okay.
it talks about the insignias affixed must be reported to the Division of Housing. But all it says is insignias affixed by an authorized third-party agency or certified manufacturer must be reported. Shouldn't it be everybody reporting those?
Authorized third-party agency or certified manufacturer or local jurisdiction?
Yes, like if you look up at the section right above it, 4.26 1.2, maybe duplicate that without the OMC language.
Okay,
He's saying you forgot the local building department.
got you.
Yeah, and then there's just some grammatical corrections that I'll send over. Just
That'd be great,
so that
Tony.
one-
English isn't my first language. I grew up in Alabama. Everybody knows that. And Nate and I have talked about this, and I think you and I might have talked about this. This document has a lot of different authors, a lot of different styles, and a lot of different ways they have approached things, structure, right? So one of the things I want to do is I want to bring in a technical writer and rewrite this entire thing so it looks better, but I'm not going to get that done by Thursday.
Well, I'm happy to help where I can.
Wonderful.
And it's confusing. I mean, it's great, but also confusing with all the red lines and
Yep, and that's
additional,
why we
additional
have,
language.
and it's confusing with all the red lines, and that's why, yeah. Later today, I'm going to print one out without the red lines, or just to accept all and see how it reads. And see if we can't clean that up. And then I think that's why we have a problem bouncing straight to Nate's point on why we have a conflict in 4.13 and 4.32. Nate?
I think we can delete 4.32 because it even references the old 4.9, which is now 4.13. And so I just think that having one item say those things is enough. We don't need to say it. It's redundant,
Okay,
basically. My thought is just fix it by deleting 4.32.
I'll take a look at that.
Hey, Sam, just real quick. I think-
If it's important though, don't we need to say it 2 or 3 times?
Right.
Hey, Sam, just to clarify for what Tanya was talking about, the transferring of the language to the next one. The only people that have authorization to issue compliance insignias are third-party agencies, the Division of Housing. right? So I don't know if we want to give the locals the authority to issue compliance insignias. And I think that's why it was left out. So the locals have the authority to place installation insignias because they're doing the inspections on our behalf. And then they got certified third-party inspectors who do the installation insignias. And then the Division of Housing and certified installers that can do issue installation insignias. But the locals don't issue construction certification.
Okay. Thank you, Donnie, for that clarification. So maybe it would be helpful to clarify which insignias.
Yep. Okay.
Hey, Sam, you said that you were going to look at the document after you fix all the markups. Can you send that out to us? I would like to see that with all the corrections made and see how that reads.
Yep. Let me have the time to do it. And
Of course.
get it close to final draft. And then I'll send it out at least to the TAC, if not everybody on this group, and would appreciate any final catches on typos or things like that.
I think that I have a couple questions, but I think that if you do the modifications to show the edits, I think it might actually answer a couple of my questions. So I don't want to do that to you.
What you can do, Tracy, on your document, if you want to do it now, is go up to in Word and go to review or track changes and just accept all changes and then see how it reads.
Okay.
But my guess is it's going to be a couple hundred changes because we've made red lines to red lines. I'm not sure how it's going to look when I first do that. All right. Rule 7 still being reviewed by DOH. Once I get what those changes are, I'll send them out as much in advance of the April 4th meeting as possible. If you guys, and so let me just kind of get a gist of that. I'd like to do Rule 7 early in that meeting, but is there anything else that you guys think we need to discuss at this point, or are we pretty good? Or I really would like to get some feedback from you on where we are. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Don't make me go around and call people in the room. Any major concerns I need to know about? We'll go that route.
Sam, I just have a few basics, so I don't have anything major. I think that once you guys, once the team worked on some of the things we've already addressed, I think that that'll solve some of, the lingering things.
Thank you. And I'll expand it beyond the TAC if there's anybody on the call that has any major concerns. Except staff. No, I'm kidding. Donnie, go ahead.
Sorry, Sam, but the one thing that we were discussing about, I'm not sure if we want to do it on this one, but it's something that we might want to do in the future is the IFC adoption.
Yep.
Or commercial projects, because there's sections in the IFC that are not referenced in the IBC. I think Mark and I kind of talked about this a few times in the past, especially when we're doing these oil rigs, when you're doing hazardous materials. Like, for instance, Chapter 57 is not covered under the IBC. And we don't have that book adopted. And that's where we get our information from to make sure that it is compliant with like flammable or combustible liquids in Chapter 57. So that's something I'm not sure if we want to get done in this one. I think it would be a fairly easy adoption. I think majority of that stuff that's in the IFC is all commercial anyway. There's nothing in there that's specific to residential. Anything that's residential will be covered under the rated assemblies and, chapter 3 of the IRC sprinkler systems that are 2904 systems. But I don't think there's anything specific for out of the IFC that you would need to change or amend out.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, I got that on the list. And then I think that we are going to see an electrical code update this year. We're starting to hear, well, we know it's coming. We're starting to try to assess it from the factory built program, at least from our inspector side. We're taking a look at it. I know our plan reviewers are probably going to take a look at it. And I don't know if as soon as we get more clarification on that, we'll roll that out, because that electrical code automatically updates per statute, I think. Donnie, you still got your hand up? Okay. Well, let's see if I've got any more slides. Says I've got 5 more. That one we've talked about. Oh, here's where I sent out on 319, and then because of a error in the attachments, I sent it out again on 320 to 940 emails. And I need to sift through those comments and those responses. Everybody will get a response, but that's going to take some time, and in priority will go to the TAC members, and that'll be a report given at the State Housing Board presentation also. The remaining schedule is that April 4th meeting. Talk a little bit about the enforcement piece of that. And also March 31st is my deadline to file those proposed rules, and I will send those out prior to that or at the same time, knowing that I've got 10 days from there to make any final changes. So that'll be after that April 4th meeting. May 9th is that rulemaking hearing before the State Housing Board. I may have said May 11th earlier, but it's May 9th, I think. June 30th is the effective date of the adopted permanent rules. July 1st, the deadline set in statute to regulate tiny homes. And then July 3rd, I think, is the first business day to receive those tiny home applications and requests. And we'll be ready to go. All right, so that's all I've got. Again, I want to say thank you for everybody that's hung in here all this time. The team and I have a lot of stuff to work through in the next couple days to get this ready to go. I'm available. Just holler at me on the phone or email if you want to chat about anything, and we'll stay in touch. Any other final comments? All right, we're going to end the recording. Everybody have a good day. And thanks again.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Donnie. Thanks, everyone.
Take
I
care.
just have a couple questions for you. It's about Larimer County, and like, for example, one of my questions is Larimer County is doing IRC 2021, right? And so are they going to recognize